Welcome back to Sustaining Sport. Today I'm so pleased to be in conversation with Etienne Stott, Olympic gold medalist turned environmental activist. Along with Tim Baillie, he won the men's slalom canoeing C2 event at the London 2012 Olympics. Since retiring, Etienne has become increasingly involved with environmental activism. In recent years, he has worked with Extinction Rebellion and has actually been arrested taking actions of civil disobedience to raise awareness. In this episode, we start with his sporting journey. We then switch to how he understands the climate crisis, and we end by bringing the two sides together, where athletes can use their platform within society to call for broader action. Along the way, we discuss things like which drivers of the climate crisis require more systemic and fundamental revisions, how the inherent connection that canoeing has with the power of nature compared to other sports impacts the canoeist worldviews, and how Etienne himself stays grounded and motivated after his entire career was changed by one brilliant race. Please enjoy this episode. Welcome, Etienne, to the Sustaining Sport podcast.
Thanks for having me, Ben. Really good to be here, and looking forward to it.
So, question, I think in previous episodes, I've started too much on the sustainability side. So today we're going to start on the sports side. Where did your relationship with sport begin?
Well, that's really interesting. So it started, I think, really when I must have watched Top Gun back in the day. I don't know how I watched it because I was probably too young. I didn't watch it at the cinema. I don't know where I came across it, but I somehow decided to become a fighter pilot. And I actually have a bit of my granddad was a fighter pilot in the Second World War, and my dad was interested in flying. And I was like, right, I need to become a fighter pilot. I'm going to become a fighter pilot. But to do that, you have to be kind of bright and academically decent, which I was, but also you have to be physically fit and capable. And I just had no background in any of that, and nobody in my family did. And so I started to get more involved in sports. I played rugby and football a bit when I was younger, but I didn't really like them, wasn't very proficient in them at all. And I started to play hockey, field hockey, which I really liked. And then I wasn't very good at. And then I joined the Air Cadets as part of my career into the RAF. And I didn't get on there well at all. But around the same time, I was also in the Scouts, and that's when I started. I was introduced to the sport of canoeing and all sorts of other outdoor sports. And I went to my local club, which is where I grew up in Bedford, called Viking Kayak Club, and they had a really strong kind of slalom canoeing scene there. And I just saw these people paddling and was like, "Wow, this is super cool. I want to be like them. I want to do this. It's wicked." And I think also I must have probably seen on the Olympics, around about the Barcelona Olympics, and I suddenly kind of made the decision, right, I'm going to be an Olympic champion. I'm going to be a world champion. In fact, I'm pretty sure I decided I was going to be the best kayaker in the world at that point, and set about cracking it on, and started going canoeing more and more often, and just took more and more time of more of my life. So by the time I was 13, I was pretty serious about being a good kayaker, and eventually, I found myself winning the Olympics a long time later, though.
Well, I guess that makes sense. You wanted to end up in the cockpit, can I say, of a moving craft, and you just picked a canoe instead of a fighter jet. Which, I mean, linking topics already, is probably slightly more sustainable.
No, well, I mean, the interesting thing was, I guess these sorts of sports, I'm learning a bit of windsurfing now, sports where you're involved in movement and energy and, really fun things to do. And I'm flying is a fun sensation. I'd like to learn how to do, paraponting or paragliding, whatever. It'd be really cool. Hang gliding, whatever. It's a lovely sensation. And I just think that sports like canoeing, just such a cool feeling. It just feels great. And when you get, that's the thing about it. It always calls you to the next level of proficiency. You always start, one day you're an hour canoeing, you do one thing, you think, oh, that was super cool. You spend the rest of the hour trying to do it again. And then the next time you can do it, but you do something else. You think, oh, that was super cool. I want to try and do that. And it draws you in. And I do see, but I definitely would not have made a good fighter pilot, because even to this day, I can't figure out left and right very well. So my mum always used to joke to me about, I wanted to be in the Red Arrows, and she said, I'd have been hopeless in the Red Arrows because they'd have turned left and I'd have turned right and destroyed the whole formation and created some massive fireball in the sky. So that wasn't going to ever work. So I think I probably found myself in a better place.
Staying on the canoeing, tell me what it was like in the build up to London 2012. I mean, were you confident? Were you feeling like this was in the bag, or how were the nerves?
No, I mean, we were not expected to win the Olympic title in London. There was a crew from Slovakia called the Hochschorner twins, who were hands down the best crew in the world. They're undefeated at the point of the London 2012 games. They'd never been beaten in an Olympic competition. And even we would have probably said, if you're a betting person, and you shouldn't bet on sports like canoe slalom because they're completely unpredictable and it's dead easy to lose your money. But we would have said, yeah, they were the favourites. We also were kind of slightly in the shadow of another British crew, which was made up of a guy called David Florence and Richard Hounslow, and they had more attention from the media on them because David Florence had won a silver medal at the Beijing Games. So Tim and I were at the same level as David and Richard in terms of British level. We knew that we were good crews. Tim and I were solidly in the top 5 or 6 in most competitions in the world. We considered ourselves to be world class. We hadn't won any major championship. We had won European medals, but we hadn't won any like major titles at that point. But we spent an awful lot of time really thinking about the psychological demand of the Olympic Games, and we prepared really well. We had an excellent psychologist called Katie Warriner, who was really massively influential, and our coach Nick Smith. Together we formed a really good team, and I still say to this day, we made a lot of really good calls in our preparation, a lot of clever thinking that we did to be prepared for the challenge of the Olympics, which, although it's very similar to normal sports in inverted commas, it's also really, really different and puts a massive different strain. And so we were, I guess we were really focused. We were really committed to the way that we were going to do our racing. We were really committed to our principles of the way we were going to conduct ourselves in this space. And we were actually at peace really with the outcome, whether or not it came well or came badly. We were very clear that we were going to go out there. We were there to give everything we could to that moment, to honor that opportunity with our full attention, rather than being drawn off in directions of fear and all those sorts of things. We wanted to focus on that moment, be present, and give it our everything. And I think we were very successful at that. So we weren't really that nervous. Of course you are nervous, but we weren't consumed by it. We were just we were really focused. We were really clear on what we wanted to do. And we went out and went out and did it. But it was a really interesting time because, of course, you never quite know. And of course, you only ever know until afterwards you look back and you think, wow, that was cool.
And I think, the great appeal about things like the Olympics, and I suppose the World Cup is another example, is also its great pitfall is that it's only every 4 years. So there's that extra level of you can't just be doing it this time next year. And I would even add on to that, with you as a British athlete competing in a British, Olympic Games in the UK, this was really like once in a lifetime.
It is, absolutely. And I often say it's once in several lifetimes. Your lifetime as an athlete is probably 10 years, maybe, depending. You've got to stack up a lot of athlete lifetimes to manage to get a home Olympics in your time. And we were exceptionally lucky. Still consider myself to have been extraordinarily lucky for the journey that I had. Getting started in Scouts with such an amazing group of Scout leaders who gave me that chance to go kayaking, experience the sport, and then all the way through the volunteers, the coaches, the people who were running the sports, the people who were influential upon me. These things all add up to to what happened that day. There was many moving parts, and I was very lucky to be for them to align in that time.
Yes, and obviously, what a miraculous achievement winning a gold in the Olympics is. Tell us, how did your life after that change? Because obviously, even if you'd performed well, it would have changed significantly. But to win, it must have really, changed. Your own fame status, your expectations. What changed after that?
Well, it's a strange thing, isn't it? And I think this is one of the things that I really try to communicate with. Is one of the strengths that we had coming into that race was we were really clear about who we were and what we were standing for, and what would be true on the other side of the Olympics, no matter what the outcome. And that was one of the reasons why we could stay strong, because our sense of identity, our sense of who we were, our sense of worth, of course, it was hugely linked to the Olympics and the outcomes. You are playing quite a high stakes game, it seems like, in sports, but at the same time, we knew we'd be okay if it went wrong. We talked a great deal about how we'd behave and how life would be if we basically bombed it and we just did a terrible job. So when you win the Olympics, I said it's like, your life moves into like a parallel track. In fact, you're the same person. You're at the eye of this kind of storm. You're the same person, but the way that everybody relates to you almost instantly changes in the kind of beat of that moment when the result is announced, and it changes forever, really. I can't say it changes forever, but my experience so far is that being Olympic champion, people will always think that's awesome. And no matter what you do, but to a degree, what you do subsequently is really interesting because of that. But now as my life as an activist, we'll come to that, I guess. But changing your life into a parallel track is quite crazy, because everybody suddenly wants to talk to you about all these things, and almost everything that you've done beforehand becomes really interesting to people. Like, what did you do and which school did you go to? And these things are of no real consequence up until that moment, but they all suddenly become kind of gold plated and have this, this glow, which I think is one of the beautiful things about the Olympics, because it means everybody in your life can claim a little piece of that gold medal. The teachers, the people, who were running the sports clubs, the places that you went to but never came back, all these little things, everyone has a little piece. And it's true, because it takes all that time to build up. So your life changes in that way. And of course, you get many opportunities to go and be at places. And, I went to the Buckingham Palace to get my MBE and, meet the Queen and do all sorts of things, that are really, you'd never get the chance to do if you weren't an Olympic champion. And of course, you get to, you can, I suppose in some ways, and I've not done this a lot, but sometimes you can just use your Olympic champion status and you can kind of knock on any door you want and say, I'd like to speak to you, I think it would be interesting, kind of thing. I'm not saying I do that, but, metaphorically and kind of actually in some cases you can do that. So your life changes. It's a very wonderful thing, and as I said, I count myself as very lucky. But it's super cool, and I can't say I became suddenly rich and mega famous. That's not how it works. But I got to do lots of speaking opportunities. I really enjoyed telling people about the story and sharing my experiences. That was one of the reasons I motivated myself for continuing my sport for so long, was to share my experiences. Your life is different, but it's kind of the same, and you're the same person. I still love canoeing. I still wanted to be in my community and continue my sport, but yet there's this whole other thing happening, and it's beautiful. It's really cool. But at the same time, you're the same person. It's odd.
I like what you said there at the start about, you knew it didn't matter the result, that mentally you'd be okay. And I think that's a good metaphor for many things in life, that we often think, oh, you need to give it all and go for it, and the losers will fall down and the winners will stand up. And no, I think your experience there gives the opposite, where you want to prepare to the greatest degree you can, but also almost prepare for the worst, that you knew if you came second, you came last, you've done the best for yourself, and that the world hasn't ended.
I think that's a real myth. Yeah, that's a real myth, kind of propagated probably in the media and contemplating failure. Failure is an inevitable aspect of any endeavor, especially any worthwhile and complicated endeavor. It's going to you're going to have to deal with it, and focusing entirely on the positive side of that journey leaves you very vulnerable, because inevitably you will start to feel very uncomfortable if it looks like it's going south, and then you start to panic and you lose control of the whole thing. Whether if you're actually familiar and you have some sense of psychological safety, you might call it, of whatever's going to happen, you'll be okay with. But that's the interesting thing about sports, is it is so intense emotionally. It is life and death endeavor, but without the life and death. In most sports, let's be honest, there is some sports where that's more of a factor, but it has the intensity of life and death. It has the power and the emotional pull of that, and people competing and participating like me. It is everything. It's everything. But if you can somehow liberate yourself of the burden of feeling like it's life and death, but can keep the intensity of that, you can reach this incredible level of thriving and of crazy experiences that are really really amazing.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of fan cultures, it can seem like it's the most important thing in the world. There's that famous Bill Shankly quote that football's not about life and death, it's far more important than that, or something along those lines, where again it's kind of humorous in some senses, but that can be taken to too far to an extent. And sport, after all, is a reflection of the human experience, but without the full consequence. I sometimes think that you can compare, again, kind of fan tribal culture to sort of war, in that you get patriotic and this kind of stuff. The nice thing is that no one has to die. You can watch the sport and enjoy it without those over intense consequences. Question for you, just before we start moving on to more of the sustainability side, with all of that you said, that all the doors suddenly seem to open for you, how do you stay grounded when that's the case?
Yeah, well, I suppose I'd slightly reframe. I mean, I guess it depends what you want out of things. I saw different athletes going in different directions. I very much wanted, when I was continuing sport, I love my sport. I wanted to carry on, and I did carry on for a further 4 years after 2012. Although Tim, my crewmate from the Olympics, retired, and I found another crewmate called Mark Proctor. The reason I did that was because I wanted to continue to pursue this kind of rich seam of experiences and knowledge that I believe you really only get from pursuing an endeavor very closely, pretty much the exclusion of many other things. And you really dive and immerse yourself and strip everything out and focus really clearly. The feeling, I loved sport. I love my sport, and I never expected to become rich and famous, never really was that interested in it. I guess we both welcomed some of the nice things that happened as a result of the Olympics, but it wasn't the reason we did it. And it didn't really change who we were and what we were about. And we really loved our sport. We wanted to give back a lot into our sport after we won. I particularly wanted to share my experience and knowledge, the things that we worked and stressed so hard for, to share that with people, empower people with some of the things that we learned. And I think some sports, and this is a hypothesis, it's interesting, some sports tend to make you think that it is your ability that gives you the victory. And there's sports where there's a more direct linkage between your effort and your performance. Over in a sport like ours, which is really much mediated by the whitewater natural forces, which are hugely, nature is much more powerful than any other single opponent. You've got opponents that are also dealing with this. You've got, in my situation, a crew of 2 people. You've got a lot of moving parts, and actually it's a very humbling sport, canoeing. It can smash you up. Even if you're the Olympic champion, the next day you can go out and get a real kicking out of it. You know what I mean? And it's very humbling. It teaches you that you can't guarantee that you're going to be amazing just because you've done a couple of good things here and there. And I think sports like mine do keep you humble. They just teach you that there is things out there that doesn't matter how good you are or how much you practiced, how much you prepared, how much you think you deserve it. Sometimes the story doesn't work that way. And that keeps my experience of canoeing and many other sports out there that are kind of in these kind of bigger environments. You cannot, they humble you, and you stay grounded, because, if you're going to go out and give it the big chat and the big, the big I am, the sport will simply make a fool of you the next chance it gets. And so that's never been an issue for me, I think. And it was really important to stay close to our roots because we loved our sport, we loved the community, and we recognized how lucky we were, how many things we were so lucky to have in that moment that led up to that we felt, lucky. We worked our guts off for many, many years, but we were also extremely lucky. And it's those two things combined. You can't just put it down to yourself, and therefore you should be humble, is my simple kind of way of saying it.
Yeah, no, and it's very interesting where I would compare it to a sport where maybe personality and hype is probably pretty essential, is a sport like boxing. And there, if you compare it to, in the ring, it is literally just you and the opponent. It's what you do and what your opponent does. That defines the entire outcome. There is no, as you say, external elements such as nature, obviously assuming the ring is designed properly. So yeah, just getting onto the topic of nature, you've mentioned that in your upbringing, it was a big role, and even your choice of sport, you were always quite close to nature. How does this now lead into your post-sport life of activism?
Yeah, and it's something I've got to say. I never really imagined myself being an activist and a campaigner. I still wonder somehow how the steps lined up, but this is what I've got so far. So first of all, I grew up. I loved messing around in forests and being outdoors. Scouts and that helped me to do that. We did lots of experiences, but at those times I didn't care about nature. It just was like, yeah, man, let's go and do stuff. You know what I mean? I think really important part was, in canoeing, got to see and experience some very beautiful places. And you do just sometimes stand and have your breath taken away by the awesomeness of the outdoors and nature. I think it's interesting that over the time, so the last few years of my career, I suppose, probably the last between 6 and 8 years, I suppose, especially the very last 4, I was really focused on this idea that there was this knowledge that if I could continue, I could get it, distill it, and then offer it to other people. This was a really important part, because I thought, how am I ever going to have an opportunity to learn? Because I believe, lessons learned in any endeavor are transferable, actually, to a great degree. And when I retired from my sport, I was like, wanted to work with young people, organizations, adults, anybody really who was looking to explore their potential. That's what it was, because I got to explore my potential. I got to witness that firsthand in myself, but also seeing other people. Human beings are incredible. They just do amazing things. And when you see sports, it's a routine thing. There was nobody could ever have looked at me and said, you're able to be an Olympic champion. I said I was going to be, but they must have been chuckling in their faces, right? The what we are capable of is hidden from us until that moment when we start to push and stretch and be challenged and supported to explore that potential. And I came out of sports with this massively strong belief in human potential and how amazing we can all be. Of course, we know in sports, and it's visible in sports, but it's also visible in the news, we can always take that low road. We can always go into a more desperate, bad side of life. But also in sports, there's that opportunity to rise and to transcend and to be better versions of ourselves. And I came out of sport thinking that, and I was going to go and speak in schools, and I did do, and I did a lot of courses, and I was thinking of becoming, doing all sorts of different things. But as I started to learn about the climate emergency, I suddenly was realizing actually this human potential is really facing a big wall. It's going to hit the wall. Our civilization is headed, and all this amazing, beautiful potential that is in our civilization, much of it is unrealized even as we speak, but it's going to be just poured away, burned up, whatever you want. And I just could not logically continue in my efforts to inspire and empower people towards a future that doesn't exist. That's not right. I felt like, as an athlete does, when you get a goal, I think athletes are very, very radical people. They set themselves a goal, and you find where you are, and you find the direction, the methods that most effective towards furthering yourself towards that goal. And that, to me, is kind of like a reasonable definition of radical. And I was like, right, we're in big trouble here. How am I going to contribute? Because I do believe my life is there. Its purpose is essentially to serve life and to create positive impact in the world. I don't know what else your life is really for. And I mean, it is for other things, but it's a big important thing of what one's life is. And I just was like, right, I need to do something. I can't just pretend I didn't hear this. And it was round about this time that Extinction Rebellion came along, and I was really persuaded, basically, by, I suppose, two things. The first thing is their case for the urgency, and their case for the need for the voices of ordinary people to be involved in it, in the production of this plan to take us away from where we are now towards a safer place. And I was also very persuaded by this idea of peaceful disobedience and non-violence, very specifically, this way of being, this way of acting, that to me really made sense and kind of accorded with my values. And these methods have been proven in history to have been effective at creating very rapid, large-scale changes. Although how rapid is, always another story about that. But these methods work, and I kind of realized, well, I think I can do these things. Extinction Rebellion at that time, and are known even now. People risk their liberty to create protest actions. And I thought, actually, I think I can do this. I don't think the consequences for me, in my position of privilege, and especially as a public figure, I thought, well, I've got a more role to play here, because as a public figure with this title that I have, I figured someone like me doing this should hopefully serve to normalize and to open the discussion about why these behaviors are actually proportionate and justified, and actually how a responsible, something of a pillar of society like me, a sports champion who might not be expected to do sorts of things like this, why is that person behaving like this? This is a key question everybody should ask themselves. What is making people do these protest behaviors when they really could just be at home watching Netflix, or in my case, going canoeing and visiting schools and things, And so I just became an activist because I saw it as the most sensible, effective, and appropriate use of my time and energy and my life. And I think I still kind of think, wow, that happened. I don't know how, but that's how it happened.
I resonate with your point around using sport as a sort of, well, if you consider sport as a pillar of society, that it has this power to almost turn back and assist on certain things. I guess that's part of the premise of why I do this podcast. And I think it also can help in certain discussions when, and not to get sort of overtly political, but when a lot of sort of right-leaning newspapers look at Extinction Rebellion, and they see a lot of, 18, 19-year-old white women, and they're like, what have these women ever done? They're too privileged, and they should be working or whatever. And then if that's the only thing that they see or are shown, it's very damaging. And also, they're entirely misapplying the facts. That they're generalizing, they're stereotyping, they're doing all these things. When you have someone who stands up and says, "Oh, we need to take these things seriously," and they're like, "Oh, what have you done?" You can be like, "Well, I've won I've won an Olympic medal. What have you done?" And suddenly, I think exactly as you said, not to say that you winning an Olympic medal makes you an authority on climate change by any degree, but it does say, listen, I have shown a level of determination and skill to achieve a certain goal. I'm now refocusing my determination on this new goal. Ironically, the goal being saving society as we know it, putting my energy towards that. Do you find that that can be kind of helpful when you're having these discussions with people who are not fully aligned with believing in climate change?
Absolutely. I think I suppose there's two things. So first of all, even before Extinction Rebellion came along, I'd met this guy called Dave Hampton, who was an ex-rower, GB level rower, who was very had been working in this sustainability arena for quite a long time. And we formed Champions for Earth, which is an organization kind of set about this idea that sports people and sports has this platform, has this entry into people's hearts and minds that few other things do. I'm not saying everybody's into it, but that's a lot of people do engage with the power and beauty of sport, right? Even Olympic shows, people who don't care about sport can be drawn in, and that power, it's like Spider-Man, his uncle, I think, isn't it? And with great power comes great responsibility, and I see sport as having great power. People can move. Cristiano Ronaldo can move his plastic bottle off his thing, and it creates a huge discussion and also just the fields of sport are these huge kind of emotional spaces where we are open to experiences and we're open to things, and that's why they're so, corruptly, used by messages of fossil fuel sponsorship and other, very dangerous products, essentially, because they know that they can get through to people there. But coming back to your point, yes, it is this platform, and I think Extinction Rebellion is far more diverse than the media portrays, and it does that willfully. We have to be honest. The media in this country is no friend of the ordinary person, despite it. I'm talking about the press and print media here. Very often are right leaning, and I don't think it's about right or left. In this case, I think it's a mistake to talk about that, but it is certainly the case that they are owned and perpetuated by people who benefit hugely from the current status quo. And that means that they've got no interest in changing things right now because they're doing very well out of it. And the media portrays Extinction Rebellion and other activists in this very mean and unfair way. Of course, there are people who are in those groups who've got a history of activism and who might even identify themselves as a crusty. But there's Extinction Rebellion and lots of other groups have brought thousands of people into activism who had never ever considered something like this before. And there's people from all ages and different backgrounds, social class, educational backgrounds, from different ethnic groups and religious groups. It is very often very convenient to attack the messenger. This is one thing we've seen also. This is over and over and over again. The messenger is attacked rather than the message being, aired and interrogated and being engaged with. That is, I always say, protest is a form of communication. I don't always say it. I've started to say it because this is a really good way of explaining it. It's a communication method, and it is an unnecessary form of communication if the powers that be are listening to their people properly and they are hearing their concerns and acting upon them, which is what is supposed to happen in democracy. And when their voices of ordinary people who are reasonable, who've got a very sensible thing to say, are being ignored, when, this is again another aspect of the power of Extinction Rebellion. I'm not a climate scientist. we don't need to know that much about climate science. We need to reference the best science, which is the United Nations saying, this is what's going on. We need to stay to 1.5 degrees. We've got a carbon budget of this, and we need to go get to zero carbon. Otherwise, we're going to reach tipping points, blah, blah, blah. I don't need to know that. I don't need to have read those academic papers. I just hear Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, saying investing in fossil fuel is moral and economic madness. That's a reference point. And when that communication, when people in this country now, something like 80% of people are seriously concerned about the climate and the future of our planet, that is not being reflected in government policy and the way that they're acting. And that's really undemocratic. And then when that voice is being ignored, it becomes more and more, well, people have to be more and more creative. How are they going to get their voices heard? And then you start to get protests like this happening. And when you are being attacked by, whatever it is, the forces of the status quo that want to not change, it is very much all of a sudden there is power in a messenger of a certain, different messengers who can get through and speak to people, and who, I say, I don't claim to be better than anybody else. I really see myself as an ordinary person who just was lucky enough to do lots and lots and lots of canoeing. And I applied myself, blah, blah, blah. But I'm just fundamentally not that different from most ordinary people. I came from a very ordinary background. But when you are communicating with people who are sometimes actually quite hostile, it can be important that you have something that you share, which is the Olympics was really cool. Lots of people thought that was really good. It's a place to start. And it means that it's not so, we can spend less time on, well, people still very interested whether or not I, fly around everywhere and what I eat and everything. But, in my past, I did lots of these things. I can't hide that. It's a matter of record. But now I am showing, I hope, and demonstrating, acting the way that is consistent with my beliefs. I call that leadership. It's not showing what, it's not telling people what to do. It's showing people what can be done. And I think sports people have a power to do that, because I think just because of the position that they are in our society, we have a high regard for sports people, sometimes not necessarily, with just cause, but, there are some really amazing people involved in sports. And when they use their voices for pro-social purposes, they can do incredible, things and achieve incredible things. We've seen that, Marcus Rashford and, all sorts of different things like this. It's very interesting when sports people use that power rather than going, oh, actually, I don't want to do politics. I don't want to, get on the issues. I just want to play sport, which is fine. They may want to play sport, but they also do have a latent power that they can step into if they choose to.
Yeah, I think that raises a lot of interesting issues. Namely, I would say it's frustrating when a lot of people are still, denying that there's a problem or that kind of stuff, or the extent of the problem. As you say, there's some very reliable sources repeating almost daily now that this problem is significant. What I think is more difficult, and where there is area for debate, is around the how. Like, how do we address this problem? I think when I started, because I finished my bachelor's degree, which was pure like commercial, like business degree. And I was like, okay, but now I acknowledge there's this problem of climate change. How do I help solve it? So I thought, of course, renewable energy. So I went to go work for a renewable energy company for a couple of years. But then you after you do that, you're like, hang on, this is not perfect. This is not going super swimmingly. Like if this continues at this pace or even a bit faster, we're still not going to hit our target. So I'm like, okay. Then I went back into academia, did a degree in sustainable development, and I'm like, okay, but now we're getting a bit more into this. And one of the key elements they raised at the time was around how we need to decouple economic growth from emissions, as in if people's lives are going to keep getting better, then we need to decouple. I'm like, okay, that's good. So then that a couple of years, but right towards the end of this program, and I'm very grateful that I had a very honest professor in sustainability. She just sort of laid it out for me, and said, listen, even if this happens much faster than we think it's going to happen, it's not going to happen fast enough. And we've attributed too much joy to, the material consumption. So although technical change will be so important to this transition, so will social change. And then I'm like, okay, so now we get to this matter of social change. We need to convince people, or at least make people aware of the thing. And then almost by magic, just as I was having these thoughts, and for context, I did my master's degree in Sweden. This person in Sweden decides to start taking Fridays off from school to, kick up a very peaceful fuss. And I was like, okay, that for me was the moment the penny dropped, where I was like, there's no solving climate change with just technical solutions, as much as the, shall we say, investment class would like you to believe. There has to be some kind of acknowledgement. And you can see it. I mean, today is a perfect example that Shell, even though this is now 4 years or 5 years later from when I had this moment, Shell are cashing in record profits. I saw a stat today. I actually have a quote here from the boss of BP. He says he wants to dial back on green energy because he's worried about the financial returns, and pivot more into oil and gas. I mean, that's a news headline from January or February 2023. How do you get your head around the fact that although something like Extinction Rebellion is making great strides in other elements of the system, how we create the social change seems quite difficult?
I mean, it's a huge question, right? And I think it's just you telling me that I saw these headlines. It's disgusting. These companies are killing us. They are they have no regard for our lives. It's really, really clear. Our government is letting them do this as well. And our political system, I would argue, is not capable of reining them in because it's so corrupted and it's so short-termism. It's so short-termist, and we're in big trouble. Extinction Rebellion have done a great job, and other activist groups, Insulate Britain, Just Stop Oil, and you have all the other. There's a whole ecosystem of groups and organisations trying to create change here and have been pushing, for decades. What I do think is that we need people to engage with this reality, and it's a tough one to take, is that you can put it either directly or less directly, but these companies are killing you and your future, and they're killing your loved ones and their future, and the government is allowing them to do that. It's complicit in that, and we've got a really big problem here because if people really knew what they were trading right now with, their lives right now are, more or less hard, and there's difficult times, and some places around the world it's utterly miserable, and some places it's not that bad. If people who are kind of not really getting it right now were to see what is in store for us and in store for their loved ones, I think they would be tearing this whole thing down with their bare fingers because it's so unjust, it's so wrong, it's so brutal, the future is so wrong. And we have to just be really clear about the injustice that we're facing. It's everything, everyone, every living thing forever that we're talking about being affected by. And it's these companies. It's like that BP CEO. These people, these organizations, there are individuals in these organizations who are making decisions to do this, who have somehow reconciled that somehow physics isn't going to work the way that it is working, and they think that somehow they're not going to be affected. I just think it's very challenging, but what we need to do is for more people to realize, and they don't necessarily have to go and stand on top of an oil tanker like I did. You probably don't even need to be arrested involved in peaceful disobedience. You just need to be out and demanding really clearly. Every day you could write a letter to your MP. You could tell thousands of people to, I don't know how it works. We just need to have an overwhelming sense of pressure towards doing the right thing here. And more people need to wake up to that. And I believe more and more people are. It's just they're not necessarily realizing that there's a pathway to change here. And the pathway, I believe the only pathway to change is people power. People are going to have to stand up and take back control of their future somehow. And there's kind of easier and harder ways of doing that. I personally am in favor of the voices of ordinary people being brought in to help with this plan. The citizens' assemblies, which is what Extinction Rebellion. I think that's really promising because I think there's a lot more very chaotic and unpleasant ways that this could happen, and especially those risks and the likelihood of those things happening will increase the longer we wait, and the more young people realize how disenfranchised and how, frankly, I don't want to swear because I don't want to ruin your podcast with depending on the audience, but how badly let down they're being, and that's using the most mildest, outrageously mild version of what's happening to them. Once they realize that, there's going to be an explosion of rage, and I don't know what that's going to look like, but we can do this. Every day that we wait is making it harder. Every day that we wait is going to make it worse. And every day that we wait, we're storing up more problems for ourselves. And the choices that we have are really stark. We are now alive in a point in history where we are being asked, whether you turn away, whether you look on it and face it, we are being asked to step up and act. We are being told that if we do not act, we are condemning ourselves. It is clear. I'm just encouraging every person. I know it's scary. I have to look at it myself. Find someone else to stand up with, speak to other people and support each other so we can face this truth and face it squarely and make change happen. And there's, who knows what sort of way change will happen, but we have to be really clear. We have to end the fossil fuel era. It has to be done fairly. I believe I believe in fairness, and it has to be done quickly. And, my next task is, we've got in April, we're asking Extinction Rebellion are going to be bringing 100,000 people to London starting on April the 21st. And we're going to stay until we hear what our government has got to respond to this group of ordinary people who are really clear about what needs to happen. So that's all I've got to say, really. I think it's very important to recognize that we are not just passengers here. This is, climate change is being done to us. If you're in some countries like Pakistan or wherever, you're really clear, they didn't make this happen to them. We have a responsibility, and it's really wrong to just shrug that responsibility off. We've got a responsibility, and we should really be careful about taking responsibility and acting.
It's funny because I do think some of the right voices are slowly getting into the mainstream. I saw at the World Economic Forum this year, there was Johan Rockström, who's one of the key authors around planetary boundaries and like the spillover of if for example, if the Arctic ice melts, then the sea levels rise, which creates more heating, that kind of like spillover effect. He's one of the key academics, and he was able to give a very succinct sort of presentation of his work to what I would call more of a mainstream audience. The problem is, of course, it is happening a bit too slowly, that if someone slowly takes that on board and says, okay, maybe I'll do X, Y, Z. I also think we have a problem with expectations, that the wealthiest people in the world are setting a certain expectation of lifestyle that can be achieved, and that everyone down the income ranks are just like, oh, well, if I work hard enough, I can achieve that. The problem is most of these lifestyles are exceptionally carbon intensive, and of course the planet literally cannot handle that. Like if everyone's lifestyle keeps materially improving year on year and year, even if we decarbonize to quite a heavy extent, you've got other problems. You've got biodiversity loss, you've got land use, you've got all of these things that we just can't change. So we need to reduce our expectations. And there is, not to be very maybe melodramatic about it, but there is some weird truth in the fact that when the climate does collapse, if it does collapse, our expectations will be lowered. To mark my words, no one will be worrying about their seaside mansion in Miami when the hurricane comes by. So there's this weird thing where we're on the clock. We can get it solved in time, but if it doesn't get solved in time, planet Earth will continue to spin, which is terrifying and relieving in the same time.
I just think I got to share something here, and I don't know if you've come across this or some of your listeners might have, but I'm really taken and heartened by some of the things I read. And I think you alluded to it earlier, this kind of concept of degrowth or steady state economics, which does not rely on ever increasing production and consumption to create a stable economy. And there's a really interesting study called Living Well Within the Planetary Boundaries by Julia Steinberger and a few others, and I'm sorry to not able to name them. And in it, there's a really heartening thing. And they've studied it, and it's peer reviewed, and I'm sure there's lots of other stuff around it. But this is one thing that I've found really interesting, and it said basically so much of our energy is wasted, life as in human life energy, as well as actual fossil fuel energy, is wasted in growth, which is not needed for human well-being. And they've pointed to, they've kind of created, found evidence that suggests we could have an extremely good state of living on this planet with universal healthcare, education, transport, basic income, good living standards for 10 billion people on the earth, for I think it's 60% of the energy that we currently use, and that we are using right now. And this is because so much energy is being wasted, and also because so much of it is being being distributed so unevenly. And so a really beautiful, much better future for so many of us is possible. It would not be the same as what we can envisage right now if we look at the lifestyles of the rich and the famous. Yeah, but it will be a very good, happy, healthy, wholesome lifestyle where people have got good levels of well-being. That is possible with the solutions that we have. We just need to ask for them. We need to demand them. And I think a beautiful future and a fairer future and a happier and healthier future is within our grasp. And I do think things have to get pretty bad before we can, before we will change. And I only hope that we haven't destabilized, our planetary life support systems to the point that it's not capable of, supporting that kind of vision, because I think it is possible. And there is evidence, and there are economic models out there that allow that to happen, or that could happen. It's just what we're doing right now is completely unsuitable, unfit for purpose for supporting life on Earth. It's killing us. We need to change. I think more and more people are realizing, and I think the ideas are out there. It's a matter of connecting all these dots, and then people going, I'm no longer waiting. I'm no longer just going to be on the sidelines. It's time to act.
Yes, I think another great book to reference on this topic always is like Donut Economics, which is such a good book, and that's kind of the system of living in between the planetary boundaries, but meeting a social minimum. And yeah, I'm very attracted to the idea of this. A lot of the literature that's coming out in degrowth at the moment, particularly when they start segmenting which sectors need more of our attention and which don't. So they highlight things like healthcare professionals and teachers are not given the support and credit and resources that they need, and these are essential for a cohesive society. Yet there's certain other ones that are benefiting hugely from burning fossil fuels, for example, that aren't necessarily needed. We just don't need any more hedge fund managers. Whereas unfortunately the system is designed at the moment, when you leave school, if you want to be financially successful, you better become a hedge fund manager, not a teacher, even though which one is quote unquote better for society. Not to judge any hedge fund managers listening. And the other thing, of course, is and you mentioned it as well, separating well-being from material consumption. And it sounds a little bit like almost mystic when I say it that way, but I think a lot of people have experienced in their life that as soon as you buy something, particularly of large scale in a material sense, after about a week or a month, you kind of get used to it. Yeah, okay, your brain sort of desensitizes to it and recalibrates, and then you're like, what do I do the next thing? Versus investing in things that give you well-being as a distinction from material consumption, things like relationships, things like staying healthy, all this kind of stuff. And I think that's pretty essential. That one, not only do we do more research into this, but this is also communicated that we could have hopefully a society that is materially less consumptive. I'm not sure if that's a word, but higher levels of well-being collectively, because weirdly, I mean, well-being is not very high around the country right now. We've got teachers on strike this very day. So.
And I think this is the thing. We're at a time where this is actually, people are more and more, there's more and more evidence, and people are more able to say, actually, yeah, I don't think this is working. I don't think, society is not healthy. I don't feel healthy. I'm super stressed out all the time, and I'm just about getting by. There's no joy. And actually, these are all symptoms, just like the destruction of our planet. These are symptoms of a system that is actually has played its part, but now we need to do something different, because at the end of this story is a dead planet, or a planet which is so ravaged and destroyed that not many people are going to be doing well on it at all, if any. I think we need to able to have that, and sports is has a role to play here, because sports is about health. It is about this power and beauty of human beings, right? And we are capable of more. We are capable of better. And at the moment, our expectations are kind of perversely, as you say, being raised in one way to say, oh, this is amazing. But at the same time, actually, this kind of really crappy existence that a lot of people live is basically what all you're entitled to get. That's pretty much it. And I reject that. I think we can do far better. I believe we can do much nicer and healthier, fairer ways of doing things. And the time is we have to choose. We're going to have to make that choice, because at the moment the choice is being made for us, and it's not fair. It's not cool.
All right, so final question for you, because I've taken already too much of your time, but what would you say to the criticism that is sometimes put towards Extinction Rebellion, that it can almost be too anxiety inducing when you really start, if you try and engage with this problem all at once overnight, you can just drive yourself into the ground mentally? What would you say maybe the solution is to it, or if there is some kind of middle ground of engaging this thing without, as you say, maybe jumping on an oil tanker?
I say to people, look, I suppose there's two questions in there. First of all, I say to people, you don't have to do anything. Do whatever you want. You've got to, be really clear. This is where we are, and we need to get over here. How are we going to get between where we are now and where we need to be? And you can choose whichever methods you feel that are consistent with you, but are consistent with the truth, which is we are in desperate trouble. We haven't got long. And that might be for other people different things, but for me, it's what it is. And I think, there's a strong case to be made for this. I think the other part of the question saying is, yeah, the truth is brutal, right? It is tough. We're in a really rough times, and as an athlete, sometimes you just got to admit, you're just not doing well. Your results aren't good, and you've got to have a sit down with yourself. You got to have a sit down with other people who know what's going on, who can support you, and you have to look in it. We need to do that now. We need to look. We need a new coach, basically, if that's ours. Don't know where the analogy exactly sits, but our government is failing us. Our political system is failing us. We need to radically rethink our training program, because at the moment, we are not winning, and there's a beautiful potential from us all coming together, working together for something that matters to every single one of us. It could be the most fantastic chapter in human history, where we actually pull together and bring a massive number of people onto one task, and it would be truly wonderful. And yeah, the truth is hard. I don't get to choose whether or not it's true or not. It's true. We have to deal with it, and I think we've got to try. But in sports, we know that there is a beauty in the trying. Whether or not you win or not is another matter. But we have to try and win here, because we are definitely losing at this point.
Yeah, I couldn't have put it better myself. So thank you so much for that. And if I could just add on that as well, that people have more agency than you think. There might be a few people out there who think, well, if I do something, it won't matter, because then no one else will. But then that if everyone thinks like that, then you have this problem. So if you all just take the small step, then we collectively take the small step.
No. I was just going to say, people, you're never going to win Olympic champion medal if you stay at home thinking about it. And it's the same as here. If we just carry on thinking about what's going to go on, I can guarantee we are not going to be successful. We got to get out there onto the field of play, whatever you want to call it. And absolutely, we're guaranteed to fail if we don't do anything. But I guarantee that we'll feel better from trying. So yeah, sorry, Ben, to interrupt you. And I will finish, and that's it. But thank you for having me on.
No, thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for your actions around Extinction Rebellion and a lot of the work you're doing. And as you said, using that platform that the power of sport has given you a certain degree of responsibility, and you're using it for the right ends. So yeah, thank you, and maybe we'll touch base in a year's time or so and see how it's going.
Yes, let's do that.